right, so officially recording. Welcome everyone. Again, check out the check-in link as always and give us some feedback so that we can get more great speakers like Annie, who is here with us today. Thank you so much for joining us, number one. How it's going to work today is I'm going to do a little intro of Annie and, all of her amazing accomplishments and just why she's here with us as our final alumni founder of the semester. And then I'm going to ask a few questions, going to have a little conversation, and then we'll take some questions from you. So if at any point you have any questions for Annie, please just put them in the chat. That'll be best, and then I can refer to them at the end as we get closer to 12:30.
Sounds great.
Cool. All right. Well, Annie is here with us today. She's a 2010 graduate of William Mary, correct?
Yep.
All right, 2010, and she majored in women's studies and history, which is really cool. I'm a sociology major, so I'm very excited about this humanities, social sciences representation here in AFS. And she's the founder of LIPS. So yeah, she will be talking about her experience being a founder, an entrepreneur, as well as a little bit of her personal journey. The first question I like to ask all of our alumni founders, which regulars know, but if you're just tuning in for the first time, the first question I always like to ask is, Annie, when you were growing up, what did you want to be when you were older?
That is a great question. I wanted to be a vet or a marine biologist. And actually, when I got to William Mary, my declared, unofficial declared major was in marine sciences. And I met with my advisor. He was great. And I wanted to do that because I love sharks, and I still love sharks. But then all the biology classes were at like 7:30, 8 in the morning. That was a problem. And then also I took, just for fun, like a couple women's studies classes. I took a seminar on witchcraft, which was super cool.
Whoa.
And I was like, okay, well, because I always loved history, and women's studies just seemed to be something that I really resonated with. I was good at, and kind of had that, gave me the tools I needed to give back.
That's awesome. Wow. How do you feel about Shark Week?
Sorry, there's a garbage truck going by.
You're fine. Oh my gosh. I was just asking, how do you feel about Shark Week?
Okay. Could you repeat that? The magic of doing Zoom from home in the morning. Garbage.
Oh, I know. I was just asking, how do you feel about Shark Week?
Oh, I love Shark Week. Yeah, I don't have the Discovery Channel, or I don't have regular cable, so it's hard for me to stay. But whenever it comes on and I see it kind of trending on the internet, I go and find videos. And we watched a really cool, we've been watching a lot of nature documentaries during the quarantine, and we watched one on hammerhead sharks. Hammerheads are the best, and it's fun in San Diego because there's a lot of really cool marine sciences, marine biology sort of stuff going on here, so I can kind of live vicariously through those.
That's awesome. Very cool. Let's see. All right. Well, you kind of segued perfectly for me with your William Mary kind of coursework, the witchcraft seminar. I want to hear more about that. I want to hear more about everything. But my first question is usually after my fun one is, how did your time at William and Mary shape you, and personally and professionally after you graduated?
Yeah, no, it was definitely a big deal because I went to school in Northern Virginia high school. I went to Oakton High School, and and I played basketball there, but I definitely was a bit of a nerd, and as William Mary kids can relate. And so I didn't really feel like I fit in that much. I had my little group of friends, but then I got to William Mary, and being a nerd was kind of cool, or at least it was the norm. So it allowed me to be myself. I met a lot of my best friends. My partner now is a William and Mary grad.
Oh
So
my gosh.
very typical. We all stick together. And yeah, I mean, I was talking to one of my best friends from William and Mary just yesterday. And so for me, the friendships are a big part of it. And then as far as my life goes, I really think, because I found women's studies, and specifically I worked with Lisa Meyer. She was my honors thesis advisor, and
Nice.
she was just so cool. And I was like, I want to be just like Lisa Meyer when I grow up. And basically, she kind of showed me how history could also help us to recognize injustices in the present. And so I just really resonated with that. And actually, LIPS was a William and Mary publication. So it started as a women's studies project. So basically, the question or the project for the women's studies class was to determine a problem you see on campus, and then address it, in some sort of project. Which, I don't think the women's studies department really saw that at the time, but that's a very entrepreneurial question, right? Because it's saying find a problem and then make a solution. And so the problem I saw on campus, and it was actually a joke between me and my roommate, but it turned into a reality, was we were talking about how people at William and Mary were really awkward about talking about sex and sexuality. And so from there, we're like, well, what's a cool way you can express yourself? And for me, I've always been into art. And so basically it's this zine where you could post, or you could put in a PO box, or you could email us your art submissions or poetry or essays. And then we published it into a zine. And at first it was just, that project, but then it was so popular, we decided to make it into a campus publication. And there was a bit of struggle because it was, PG-13 verging on R, and we were all adults at William and Mary, but I think it shocked some of the administration. So we struggled a bit to get it recognized as an official publication, but we did. And and then it took off and launched at a few different chapters across the Southeast United States. Like we had one at Duke, one at Virginia Tech, one at Mary Washington. And so, I kind of kept up with LIPS as a hobby as I worked on my marketing career. But then a few years ago, it kind of aligned just right to take LIPS and transform it into a digital platform. And so that's kind of what it's become today.
Wow, that is so incredible. Oh my gosh, all at William Mary?
Well, that's the thing. I mean, that the stuff you do at college really does have an impact. And I think a lot of my, I didn't get a business degree. I didn't, study English to be a writer, but, history really helped shape my writing. And then as far as the women's studies, really helped me see how I could use what I was learning to solve real world problems. And I think the marketing aspect, the business aspect really came from my extracurricular activities doing LIPS. So, just a blend of all that stuff. You can start a business in college, if you come up with an idea, or even if you just start exploring, what problems are on your campus, the odds are that, that resonates outside too.
One of our first alumni founders of the semester, Sam Pressler, also he founded a nonprofit organization while he was at William and Mary that had to do with veteran services. And like you were saying, it was kind of something that spread from William and Mary, regionally, geographically, but also, and just general bigness as an organization and as an entity. And he talked a lot about, balancing student life and, kind of feeding this burgeoning project and how it kind of shaped his definition of taking care of himself as a founder. Can you speak to that, or do you have any, experiences with taking care of yourself and prioritizing wellness while still, experiencing that rigor of being a founder?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I did not do a good job of that while I was at William Mary. I was running lips. I was, set on getting a 3.8, as many people are. I was like, I'm going to get that 3.8. And I was very much a party person. And so the combination of those three, it's like, maybe I could have picked two, like, do lips and party, or do grades and lips. But because I did all three, that was very tiring. So it was hard to, maintain a social balance while at the same time, maintaining grades and things. And honestly, like, looking back, I really love all the classes I took. I learned so much from them. I'm glad I put so much focus on them, but I probably wouldn't have been as, focused on getting that 3.8, because at the end of the day, it's what I took away from the classes. No one's ever asked for my GPA. And so I think, and that kind of depends on what you're planning to do after school. Like if you're looking at grad school, that's a little different. But, for me, I think, it's really like focus on one or two things and put your all into that. But definitely maybe don't necessarily party hard, but and take care of yourself that way. Like, because at the end of the day, you're going to be 30 and going to bed at 9 p.m. and drinking lots of water. And I've got like cranberry juice with vitamin C for breakfast. But, I think the social things that you build, the social relationships you build at William Mary are so important, and sometimes more important than the grades you get. And I'm sure all the professors are like, why are you saying this? But it's true. It's, my friendships are so important to me. So, I think after I graduated, I kind of had this burnout and just didn't feel good. And so then I started, I became a vegan. I moved to San Diego to get kind of fresh air, and more sun. And since then, my health has been really great. And now I feel like because I had that experience of really being unbalanced, I'm actually ahead of the game on a lot of entrepreneurs I meet who really struggle with having that balance. You've got to always put your health first. And I still have to remind myself sometimes, but as long as you're keeping a good diet and getting lots of and I think I learned about how grades didn't matter that much did make a difference, because it's like, okay, well, if I don't get this, task in, it's not the end of the world, for work. Or if I miss this thing, it's not the end of the world. It's to eat and sleep.
Yeah, I think William Mary students, this one included, really do need to hear that. So thank you for that. Sam said a very similar thing. So listen up, everyone. Take care of yourself, or else.
Yeah, and it's hard at William Mary for sure, because I think, there's a lot of pressure on us. And I know, like, especially for you guys, like now in this coronavirus situation, it's very stressful. But I think one thing to know is that, building relationships is how you get jobs in the outside world. And also, at the end of the day, if you follow your passions, like, I was told I shouldn't major in women's studies because there's no way I'll get a job. But really, all my jobs have come from the fact that I kind of stand out in that way, that I've got that perspective, and makes me a little different. And also, now it's enabled me to start a company. So I think, do what you love to do and don't worry too much about the job stuff, and just make a lot of friends and make like, solid relationships, I think is really important.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, transitioning from that, I mean, well, I always like to talk a little bit about wellness, infuse that self, compassion throughout the interview. But at the same time, I'm really curious. Lips is a blockchain-enabled social commerce platform.
Yes.
Correct. Okay. So I read that, and I know a little bit about blockchain, a little bit about AI, but can you walk us through, exactly what that means, and sort of what is a day in the life of working and operating Lips?
Yeah. So, you know, we're still at the earlier stages. We've been getting a lot of traction lately. We recently got our first investor, and then we got a grant from a youth technology fund and program. So that's been really exciting. And, you know, I think basically where we're at now is we are still fundraising, but really working towards creating the first, we've got an MVP, minimum viable product, which is basically like the cheapest minimum thing you can have. And we put that up online, but we're building the mobile app and we wanted to launch that next year. So a lot of my time is focused on design, fundraising, working with the team. We've got 2 team members now. And then, you know, just really, we're doing a lot of testing for the user. And so basically what Lips is we're building a social platform that uses technology and feminist theory to solve some of the problems that women and the LGBTQ community face online, like harassment, algorithmic bias, which is basically that the AI that's currently written into social media platforms is biased because the data sets being put in are, you know, one, not from the most diverse groups of people, limited number of women, limited number of LGBTQ, but also there's some legal issues, but there's also some moral issues filtered into that algorithm that causes LGBTQ content and content created by women to be blocked at higher rates. And so we're kind of looking into, like, we did the research of, you know, what causes that? How can we change that? So that's where the AI comes in, and then the blockchain comes in, because another huge issue that that creators face, especially, is plagiarism and vandalism. So, like, for example, we have one user that she is a body positive model. She posts a lot of images of, you know, of herself and her body, and because she is plus size, she gets a lot of harassment. So that's something we're addressing. But also what people have started to do is taking images of plus size women and then putting them in this Facebook group and kind of vandalizing them, dressing them up in silly costumes, like, you know, basically taking the content, yeah, it's gross, taking the content that these people created and then repurposing it, you know, to make fun of them. And also there was an issue with some of our artists that they had their picture online. A really famous artist basically screenshotted their image with one of his comments. And because Instagram, once you publish something on Instagram, Instagram owns that, or it's public content. So by this artist simply just commenting on the picture, it became his. And he was able to screenshot these images and put them up in a gallery and sell them for, like, you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of art when it wasn't even his content to sell. And so we're addressing that issue by using the blockchain. And so basically you can think of the blockchain like if there's a block, so it's a cube, right? And sides of the cube, each side of that cube is a piece of data, and then that block is connected to another block made of 6 pieces of data. And so when you upload something to the blockchain, it goes on one side of that block. But why the chain part is important is that all of these pieces of data, so, you know, 6 times infinity, are all connected to each other. So in order to hack it or change any bit of that data, you would need to hack every piece of the data on the chain. And so that makes the blockchain very secure. And so we use that for artists, because artists can then upload their content to the block. And when they do that, it's so secure that they can prove they can take their lips upload to court and say, look, like, I'm the one who uploaded this block. Here's the date and the time that it was uploaded. Here's my like user ID. So this is mine. So if someone, uploads it or posts it online, a year later, they can say, oh no, I posted it here on this date first. And if you brought that into a court of law, the blockchain is so secure that it would uphold it, similar to like a copyright, but sometimes even stronger than a copyright, because a copyright, copyright, if you do it through the legal chain, is about as secure as a blockchain. But what's cool about blockchain is all you have to do is upload it and then you're done. You don't have to go through a lawyer and all that stuff. So that's kind of how the AI and the blockchain come together.
Wow, that's incredible. Thank you so much for sharing that explanation, because that just makes me even more impressed and astounded at the work you do.
Well, the blockchain is super cool, and I highly look into it because, it's not for everything, but it definitely has a lot of social implications. And I'm working with Troy from the William Mary Blockchain Lab to kind of work on, how blockchain can have those social impacts, because I think that's where I get really excited about it. So like art, supply chains. I know one person, one of our advisors, she's using the blockchain to measure and exchange carbon output. So there's a lot of cool things to look into it. And the technology is still early, but it has a lot of potential. So the earlier you start to learn about it, I think kind of the more advantage you have, in the future.
Yeah, no, that touches on exactly what I was going to ask next, which is, you to describe during William Mary, during college, you have this like potent interest in social justice, awareness, things like that. How did you decide that the way that you wanted to translate that was through the tech world?
Yeah, that's a great question. So basically, I left William and Mary, and after William and Mary, I had a position as an intern and receptionist. I knew one of my friends from Voices for Planned Parenthood, Vox. She had started working at Planned Parenthood, so she offered me this internship, kind of working under her. I was a receptionist. I was also a hand holder in the actual like procedure rooms, which was really intense.
Oh my gosh.
But it was really cool. I was like, okay, we're helping people. This is neat. I found that the nonprofit sector I was really frustrated by, because as I learned about how my career would evolve at Planned Parenthood, it would be like I would have to be working like as an assistant or as, a junior for like 10 years before I could move up to a senior position. And then if I stayed at the senior position for like another 10 years, maybe I could move up to, the ranks where I could really have an influence over the trajectory of the organization. And that to me was very slow. I also found that I was specifically working at the Planned Parenthood in Richmond. And it was interesting because the majority of the donations for Planned Parenthood came from tobacco money, whether that be from tobacco plants or like companies like Philip Morris, or from old tobacco families, so very wealthy families in Richmond. And that's because, the tobacco industry in Richmond, that was where the money was. So that's where you had to go to ask for donations. So I found that, to be problematic, that the existence of Planned Parenthood relied on the existence of Philip Morris. And so I saw that as a little strange. And so because of that, I started looking more into social impact or social enterprise. And I had lived in India for about 6 months as part of my study abroad program. And while I was there, I learned about microfinance. And so I had connections back to India while I was there, and I got a job at Grameen Bank. And I started working on, I started almost as a journalist, but then kind of moved more to blogging and I got really interested in the back end, so like the technology of content, so like working on the WordPress site, doing search engine optimization, and I found that the social impact model was really interesting. Definitely still problematic, but I liked that it was self-sufficient. So like the money that it was creating, it was putting back into the programs. And I also really resonated with, you know, the entrepreneurship of that. So so then from there, I'd worked at Grammy Bank for a while, but felt like I had a lot more to learn about marketing, about content. And so I worked with again, one of my friends at William Mary connected me with a job with a Norwegian tech company that then soon after got into Y Combinator. And so I was able to go through the Y Combinator program with them as a communications director. And that really got me excited about tech and let me see like, oh, wow, like I could build a company, you know, it's not like this impossible thing. Y Combinator, I felt like I liked it a lot. I did also feel that like it wasn't the most friendly to like female founders or the experience that female founders face. So after that, I started working at the Women's Startup Lab in Silicon Valley. And that again, just like kind of like all this stuff was just kind of pushing me to be like, you know, you have this idea. It's not, you know, it's something that you're going to have to do at some point in your life because it's this bug in your head that keeps, you know, I kept kind of pushing it like, no, I'm just going to work on my career. But it just kept coming up and coming up. And so then after Women's Startup Lab, I said, okay, I'm going to turn Lips into a real company. And then, you know, just kind of see how it goes. I didn't put a huge investment into it. I didn't quit my job, but I just, you know, kept working at it, and you know, and people resonated with it. So just slowly and surely turned it into a company.
Wow. So what are some of those challenges that female founders face?
That is a great question. So I think it's going to, I'll have more of those answers as I progress in my founder journey, because I think it changes. But I think, you know, I think part of it starts with when you're coming up with an idea, like you get discouraged a lot more, I'd say, than male founders. So like when I was coming up with the idea for Lips, I didn't necessarily get the best reaction. I was told to get rid of the blockchain technology, get rid of the AI, just make, you know, a commerce app, or it's too small of an idea. And, you know, and I was kind of hurt by those. And I, you know, and it was a local male investor here that told me that. And, you know, but then I kind of took his comments with a grain of salt. I said, okay, you know, what productive can I take out of that comment? And so then that actually helped us to kind of shift our business model, not drastically, but a little bit. And also just kind of made me more determined to push through that. And then moving on to like the fundraising part, it is absolutely ridiculous how little funding female founders get. I think it's something like 2% of yeah, it's not good. It's 2% of all of VC funding goes to I think you'll have to check the data. Maybe I can send this out to you later, but it's like companies with a female founder, and then it's even smaller for companies that only have female founders. So that's been a challenge, and it's weird to go into it and be like, oh, okay, well, that's just a statistic, you know, that's not me. But then you run into it and you're like, oh, okay, I see what's happening. And a big, I just went through a boot camp that kind of talked about the unconscious bias that happens with female founders, where female founders are asked more preventative questions, while male founders are asked more potential questions. So for example, like a male founder will be asked, how do you intend to acquire customers? While a female founder might be asked, what are your customer acquisition costs? Or, you know, what's going to hold you back from getting customers? And they're similar questions, right? Because, you know, in the first question, you're probably going to address some of the challenges, but because you phrase it in that way, it makes it harder to answer because you have to go on the defensive. And so it's little things like that that make it harder. I also find that while there are more female VCs coming out, I do notice that the female VCs, you know, like most women, tend to be more risk adverse. And so, you know, there's not, I think a lot of male VCs tend to throw out money. And these are, again, generalizations because, you know, at LIPS, we kind of look at the gender as a spectrum. But if you're looking at, you know, the spectrum masculine and feminine, more masculine behaviors are rewarded in business. And I think what the struggle is it's a struggle to be yourself. So if I want to be feminine, or maybe I don't like want to be feminine, but I'm seen as a woman who should be acting feminine, you know, there's all these weird things that kind of go into it. I also think that, and I face this myself, of like how much money you ask for. Again, I tend like, you know, when I first started fundraising, I was like, okay, maybe like 50,000. And my advisor was like, no, like you should ask for 500,000. And so, you know, it's this, I think it's a lot to do with the unconscious bias, at least at the fundraising stage, that I think is the most interesting, and the most challenging, especially if you're a platform or a founder that has the a highly technical element, because then you're going to get a lot more questions and questioning of your authority or your expertise in that topic.
Thank you for sharing that. I feel like I'm not obviously in founding, but I definitely can see that it's such a contrast being sociology major and then also studying I have a business minor.
Right.
And to see the difference in that coursework and also just, you know, how I feel in those two different spaces, it's very interesting. So yeah, but amazing. There are so many creative ways to look at both things, but definitely when I'm like reading my Marx reading for my sociology class, like in the business school, I'm like, oh gosh, like, but
yeah, well, I mean, it's definitely a weird contrast. Like when I was at William & Mary, I actually held a protest in the business school because we were mad that they were building this fancy new business school while the Black Studies and Women's Studies building across the street was like literally sinking into the mud. And so we protested. I never saw myself getting into business, but I think what's been cool about getting into business is that by being someone who has like that humanities background in women's studies and feminist philosophy, it actually makes it a little easier to navigate some of the sexism and racism you see, because it's like you understand that it's not you and it's not your personal wrongdoings or something you necessarily even need to get like mad at that one person about, you know, while it, you know, if they're being a jerk to you, definitely get mad at them, but then understand that it's a bigger systemic problem. And, you know, how can you use your position in business to help address some of that systemic problem? And some of that answer is just showing up to meetings, showing up to your business like exactly who you are. Like, don't try to fit into a mold, because at the end of the day, I think, you know, business realizes its shortcomings, but it takes, you know, people stepping in and making those very clear in order for them to actually ever get addressed. So like at least like bring them to the surface, I think is an important first step.
Yeah, I mean, I've never been in another business school, but I think also at William & Mary, there are so many people that are sort of on that path of studying these things so that they can go into
Right.
that sphere and sort of show up authentically and encourage other people to do that as well.
Yeah, and I love that. I love that, and I love that, especially what I've gotten from William Mary business students and just William Mary students in general is this desire to make the world a better place, but also like not just, oh, I'm going to make the world a better place, but actually examining the structures that require that. Because I think a lot of people in business right now are saying, okay, we've got to fix the gender problem, but they haven't been exposed to or been able to take the time to read the research, read the studies, read the books that help us to understand why those problems occur and what other people have done in the past to solve them and what's worked, what hasn't. So yeah, I think it takes that rigor of study on both the business side and the humanities side to kind of bring that together.
That's affirming. Selfishly.
Yeah, no, you're on the right path. And more tech and business companies are looking for people in the humanities because exactly that, not only the critical thinking, but because they can solve structural problems. And I think structural problems are where so many people are getting stuck right now.
Well, I could continue this conversation for hours, but we do have a question from the audience. Yay.
Okay.
So it reads, we are currently learning about the importance of cheap prototypes or a minimum viable product. As you mentioned, I was a little skeptical about the real-life applications of an MVP. Can you walk me through how you went about developing an MVP without sacrificing product quality or capital?
Yeah, great question. So the minimal viable product is something that, I think you kind of struggle with. I think the first thing to realize about the minimum viable product is you have to get something out there for people to start giving feedback. So for our minimum viable product, we put out a website where people could submit their art and then just kind of scroll through. So for us, it was kind of just creating a website, first of all, to let people know we're out there, give us a space to put about us, but also start to introduce people to the idea of what we kind of wanted this to look like, and get our branding out there. So I think one thing about the minimum viable product is definitely set up goals. So if your goal is to make revenue from your product right off the bat, then that's going to require a bit more polish than if you're just putting something out there like we did, saying, here we are, here's sort of what we want to look like. Now, in some ways, we're creating a second minimum viable product, but this one, I learned a cool new term, but it was basically minimum wow product or something like that, where it's basically like, what's the least you can do to wow your customers? And the really good advice they had was focus on one feature that your customer really wants. So for our next prototype, or the mobile prototype that's coming out, we really want to focus on that issue of censorship and the algorithmic bias. And so how do we appeal to the one specific customer that we know will buy our product? And so our customer is kind of these smaller artists that are struggling. They build their account up to 50,000 followers on Instagram, but then they get deleted over and over and over again. And so what can we do to really help them? So what we did was we narrowed down that customer and came up with what they need. And then basically our first product will really revolve around that. And then as far as the capital part goes, I've put enough of my money into to Lips, but I definitely didn't put much money into the very first prototype, because that was just kind of getting it out there, testing the waters, seeing if there's a demand. Once there's a demand, then it's worth investing a bit of your capital or capital you've raised. So like now that we're on this stage where we did a $10,000 crowdfunding campaign, We raise money from the grant and the investor. We're going to then use that to build the prototype. But again, we're not putting a ton of AI or blockchain into the first product to keep costs low. Again, we're just focusing on one issue and one customer, and what's the one thing we have to do to really make that customer happy.
Awesome. All right. Well, it's 12:40, so we went well over time, but that is all good because I think this is a great conversation. I had a lot of fun.
Yeah, I had so much fun too. It's so good talking to fellow whammers.
Oh my gosh, I know. It's a certain kind of person, so it's good to connect.
Yes, I'm so excited to talk about this.
Exactly. Annie will also be doing an Innovators Toolkit with us. So she'll be talking about building more inclusive tech products. So if you are interested in that, or you just want to, connect more with Annie, check out our Innovators Toolkit later this week. And also, Annie, if it's okay with you, if you would like to connect with Annie further, just over email, I can also share that if you message me on Slack.
Yeah, that's great. Share away.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for tuning in. And Annie, I'll see you later to film the Innovators Toolkit.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you so much.
Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.
Bye.